Hi, my name is Daryl, and I'm going to show you how to replace the GameSave battery in a Game Boy Color cartridge. Here's some examples of these cartridges, all Pokemon cartridges. The ones on bottom, the yellow ones, they use a smaller battery that have solder tabs on them. And the ones on top, which I'll call the non-yellow cartridges, they all seem to use a larger battery. So here they are, the yellow on the left and the corresponding batteries, and the non-yellow on the right. Here's the close-up of the batteries. We'll have to form the tabs on the non-yellow for the non-yellow cartridges. There's the batteries and the tab. These things are readily available on the internet. Don't try doing it with batteries that don't have solder tabs on them. You can't solder onto the battery, and there's a risk that the battery will explode if you try. So don't try. Just get them. They're easy to get a hold of. Okay, here's the CR1616 that goes in the yellow Game Boy cartridge. They cost under $2 a piece currently, and here's the CR2025 battery that goes in the non-yellow cartridges. And here's some sources. The CR1616 DigiKey is where I got them, and Battery Mart for the CR2025. Okay, first we'll have to get some tools, small collection of tools, the most important one being the soldering iron. You want a good low wattage soldering iron. My favorite is an Antec Model G, but you can use any low wattage iron. You'll also need a sponge that will allow you to clean your soldering iron tip. That should be wetted, or at least moist. You'll want to get some good fine rosin core solder, or solder that has flux for electronics. This is a solder removal tool. It's spring-loaded. You push a button and it creates a vacuum and sucks up the solder. Or you can get one of these. This is a solder wick. It basically wicks up the solder when it's in liquid form. Hey, these batteries can explode. Solder can splat. Be sure to get yourself some goggles and wear them. And you'll need some side cutters, as you see on the left, and long nose pliers that you see on the right. The side cutters I use have pretty sharp tips, pretty angular sharp tips. It makes it a wonderful tool for a number of purposes you'll see. The first thing you need to do is to learn how to solder. I recommend you go watch the video at tinyurl.com/how-to-solder, one word, and you'll learn how to solder. Okay, so remember, don't heat these batteries up too much. They could explode if that happens, and wear goggles. Okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take the case completely apart. That's all there is to it. But we first have to get past this screw that has a special head on it. You're not likely to have a driver in your collection. You can buy one on the web, but heck, we can get by using our side cutters. Here's how. We're essentially going to fit the tip of the side cutters around the teeth on this screw, just like this. Hold gentle pressure, not enough to damage the tip, but enough to hold the screw firmly. Once we get a hold of that, we essentially just spin the case around the side, around the screw, and the screw will come right out. Piece of cake. Okay, so now we slide the case apart. These things just slide a couple of centimeters, and then you just lift that case right off like that. There we have it. There's the circuit board. It's not held in by anything else. It's just sort of sandwiched in there. You can see the battery that we're going to have to remove in the upper right-hand corner. And we want to be a little bit careful of that electronics, not touch it with a soldering iron or with our replacement battery or anything like that. We can take the circuit board out. It just falls out like that. Here it is. You can see the battery clearly. And first thing I'm going to do is clean my soldering iron tip and tin it. Melt a little solder on it. Get out my solder removal tool, the spring-loaded one I'll use here. Heat up the solder and suck it up. Clean the tip. Melt the other side. Get that solder melted. There's a fine art between not keeping your soldering iron for too long on the component, but getting the solder well melted. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remelt the solder on each end and gently lift the tab off of the circuit board. So here we go. I've melted it and I've bent the tab up. The other side gives me a little problem. I could have pinned the tip of my soldering iron. It might have helped a little bit. There we go. Lift it right out. There's a little blob of solder left behind. I'm just going to melt that. It'll flatten it right out. When you're done, it should look something like this. Not too much solder on there, but there's still a little bit. Okay, now we have to form the battery tabs for at least for the CR 2025 batteries. I used my long nose pliers to carefully bend those. The important thing is you don't short out the battery by allowing the bend to be too close to the battery. Make it, essentially form it just like the original battery. And the other thing we have to do is on the bottom surface, we have to trim the tab that goes on the bottom. I use my side cutters to do that. You can also remove the little plastic ring that surrounds the outside of the original battery using a razor blade to cut it and then put it back on. Here we have a close-up. See how the tab bends a little ways away from the battery and looks pretty much like the original. And there's the trimmed tab on the new battery to match the original. Now just carefully, gently set it onto the circuit board, making sure you don't touch anything metal with the battery on the circuit board except what the battery is supposed to touch. This is critical because if the battery discharges through something it's not supposed to touch, it could damage the electronics. Okay, then clean your soldering iron tip. Get some fresh solder and tin the tip. And heat up the solder tab. Once you get the solder flowing, don't touch the soldering iron tip, but you're actually melting the solder on the tab itself. And that was in the non-yellow Game Boy. Here's an example of putting it into a yellow Game Boy. There my battery slipped a little bit. Fortunately, there was nothing metal over there that it slipped onto, but you'll want to be more careful than I was. Of course, you want to verify that the positive side is down on your battery, and the negative side is up and has the tab that has to bend down to reach the circuit board. That is extremely important. Melt the solder on the tab itself. There you go, just like that. Here's the other side. Get a little bit of flow going, and then touch the solder to the tab, not the soldering iron. And there you have it. Inspect it when you're done. It should look like this. Nice shiny solder connections. You can remove that. You can see a little bit of rosin that's left on the circuit board. You can remove that with a Q-tip and some alcohol. Okay, if everything looks good, we need to put the whole thing back together. Orient the case the way it's supposed to be with the label facing the right direction. Push them together, slide them. Inspect everything, make sure everything looks like it's right and aligned, and then put that screw back in. Get out the side cutters. Gently hold the screw. And spin the case around. No need to over tighten it. The screw is just holding plastic together. You could potentially strip the threads if you tightened it too much. So there you have it. With a little bit of practice soldering in advance, it takes about 10 minutes to freshen your Game Boy cartridge so that it remembers your settings and games. Hey, I'm Daryl. I hope you enjoyed this video, and keep on enjoying your games.